Fire Emblem 4 Genealogy of the Holy War is a pivotal game in Fire Emblem's history, inspiring many core mechanics and themes of later titles such as Fire Emblem Awakening, Fates, and Three Houses. This game's story spans 2 generations because halfway through the game, all of our units die, and their children take their place to continue their battle once they become of age. FE4 is widely known for its deep customization options, and is the first FE game that features eugenics as a core gameplay mechanic, allowing you to matchmake your first-generation characters into marriage pairings to create overpowered super soldier children. As such, many players take great care to make optimal pairings to create the best army that they can for the second generation. However, as a purveyor of purely ethical strategies, I refuse to engage with this barbaric practice, and so I will not seek out character pairings and will intentionally kill off units that do marry to erase their child characters from existence, which will result in them being replaced by weaker substitute units. Welcome, I am Excelblem, and this is the worst Fire Emblem 4 playthrough ever. This game isn't particularly hard, so to make it more difficult, I'll be playing with an Ironman challenge, meaning that I cannot load or reset from saves, making all decisions and deaths permanent. Fire Emblem 4 begins with some backstory. The Granville Empire rests at the center of the Drugdru continent and has recently sent the majority of its forces to attack the neighboring country of Izak, leaving nobody behind to defend its borders. The Western Front is supposedly secured by alliances with the neighboring countries of Augustria and Verdane, but suddenly the Verdanians attack unprovoked. In the process, they capture Youngby and kidnap a noble named Ideen. Sigurd, our protagonist, the scion of the neighboring house Chalfie, hears of this injustice and leads a small force to rescue Ideen, starting a conflict which will ultimately result in him accidentally conquering half of the world in self-defense. In the prologue of FE4, the Verdanian Prince Gandalf defeats the Bold Knight Madir with a critical hit to conquer Youngby, and in the process kidnaps Ideen, returning to Verdane with her as his prize. Sigurd rides out in pursuit with 2 cavaliers, Alec and Noish, and leaves the Arbor Knight Arthur behind to protect the castle. This game features absolutely massive maps with multiple objectives, making each chapter last as long as several normal Fire Emblem maps, mainly by forcing you to walk 7,000 miles to reach anything interesting. In that way, Genealogy of the Holy War is clearly the first grand type Fire Emblem game, because at least 90% of the game is just moving your characters around. FE4 has many other quirks that distinguishes from other FE games, such as gold being local to characters, items not being freely tradable, and characters not being able to double unless they have a skill. We are soon joined by more characters, namely Azella the Mage and Lex the Axe Cavalier, and on the next turn, Sigurd's sister Ethlyn shows up, alongside her husband Quan and the retainer Finn. In a more optimized run, I would go into exhaustive detail about the stats and skills for each of these characters, but ultimately I struggle to see the point in doing so because this game is more story focused than other FE games and is extremely easy. I move my troops in one big ball to defeat enemy axe fighters in a manner that is too simple to easily describe, and I besiege the castle. Sigurd defeats the Verdane General DiMaggio by attacking him, and I seize Youngby. There we do not find Ideen because she is in a different castle, but we do find Madir, the Bold Knight who got bodied at the opening cutscene, who is somehow alive and joins us in our rescue effort. On the next turn, the Verdane General Gerard discovers that his colleague has been defeated and leads a force from Evin's castle to attack Sigurd. The ease of the previous segment has caused me to stop thinking strategically, and I move too aggressively, placing my units in range of multiple enemies. Alec is hit by multiple axe users and sadly dies. Around this time, Arvis, the Duke of Othomer, an avid barbecuing enthusiast, shows up to observe the battle. By talking to him with Sigurd, I obtain a silver sword, which is an excellent weapon that will be of great use for the next few chapters. In FE4, weapons have durability, but they can be freely repaired at any castle, allowing them to be used infinitely as long as you have the gold to cover the repair cost. I defeat Gerard's forces by attacking them and have Sigurd besiege Evan's castle to defeat Gerard and complete the map. Sigurd looks around and discovers Ideen is once again not present, and decides with purely noble intentions that the best way to proceed is to begin a full-scale invasion of Verdane. In Chapter 1 of FE4, Sigurd encounters Eldigan, the Lord of Nordion, who asks him in jest whether or not he is declaring war on Verdane. Sigurd denies that he's doing anything of the sort, and says that he's just here to rescue Ideen and nothing more. Eldigan foolishly trusts his old friend and promises to protect Sigurd's flank, as Sigurd self-defenses his way into the heart of Verdane. As this is happening, Kinbite, Verdane's second prince, prince threatens Ira to fight us by holding Prince Shannon of Izek hostage, while the third Prince Jamke of Verdain releases Aideen and the thief Du from captivity. The first Prince Gandalf catches on to this treachery and sends forces to pursue them. Fire Emblem 4 has an arena, and during each chapter you can send in units to fight for gold and experience. If you lose in the arena, you don't die like you would in the other games, and you can try it again later, but you're left with 1 HP. I go as far into the arena as I can. In the process of trying to get gold and experience, I end up damaging my entire army down to 1 HP, but I choose to deploy them onto the map anyway because I don't respect this game's difficulty. I have Sigurd handle the initial wave of enemies, and he does just fine. Most enemies have less than a 30% hit chance against him while doing minimal damage, allowing him to clear most of them without much risk. But soon a squad of enemies comes into contact with my main group. I've managed to heal a few characters, but most are still very wounded, so I leave them in the back. I attack Kinbith with Sigurd and Quan, but after a miss, Quan is hit and left with 2 HP. And this might seem really bad, but fortunately, Fire Emblem 4's AI is very stupid. The enemies refuse to attack a nearly dead Quan, and instead go after a full HP Madir, and the boss decides to run away without attacking either. I have Sigurd chase down Kinbith to kill him, leaving the castle ripe for the taking. I lure Ira into moving away from the castle and sneak around with Sigurd to seize Genoa, rescuing Shannon and allowing us to recruit Ira by talking to her with Sigurd. I also finally managed to move Du and Edain to my army, accomplishing our original objective of rescuing her. But despite this, Sigurd decides to continue his invasion not for any particular reason, but mostly because of momentum. Lord Elliot of Hairhide, a hostile Augustrian house, takes notice of Sigurd's incursion and moves to capture Evans while he is away. But Eldigan stands guard with House Nordian's Cross Knights to defend against them, resulting in a battle between these two NPC factions. Eldigan's forces are vastly superior and easily defeats Hairhide, forcing them to retreat. At this point, I abandon all pretense of trying to use my army in its entirety because moving all my units everywhere is very tedious, and Sigurd is already strong enough to handle everything. Sigurd slaughters Gandalf's entire army and then moves to besiege Marfa, where he defeats and kills the first prince, wiping out half of Verdain's ruling family and political structure, basically entirely on accident. After seizing Marfa, Sigurd rescues Deirdre from some Fist of the North Star looking bandit motherfucker and falls in love with her at first sight. He is informed by the village elder that she is the priestess of the spirit forest, who was forbidden by prophecies to ever liaise with men, because if she does, then a calamity will fall upon the world. Sigurd is not deterred by the possibility of the world ending and resolves to see her again because either for war or for romance, he is utterly incapable of keeping his sword sheathed. Prince Jamke reaches his father at the Verdain capital and finds that this war was started on the advice of a suspicious hooded cultist. However, King Batu refuses to listen to his only remaining son and sends him away to fight Sigurd. The Loptirian sorceress Sandima, sensing that King Batu has caught on to his schemes, betrays the king and mortally wounds him with dark magic. Sandima's superior, Archbishop Manfroy, shows up to reveal the cult's grand plan to revive the Dark God Loptus by creating an incestuous union between the two heirs of the Dark Lord's blood. The next phase of the map takes place in a gigantic forest where movement is heavily restricted. Instead of moving my units through the forest myself, which would be extremely tedious, I wait for Jamke's force to move towards me. I lure the third prince out and recruit him by having Aideen talk to him and then slay the rest of the group with Sigurd. I move Sigurd further into the forest alone where he is reunited with Deirdre. They almost immediately share their romantic feelings for one another despite Deirdre's unease about, dooming the entire world. She warns Sigurd of the dangerous magic that Sandima uses to guard Castle Verdain and tells him that she has a silence staff, so I have her use the silence staff on the boss to nullify his magic and trivialize the fight. As Sigurd seizes Castle Verdain, he discovers a dying King Batu who tells him that this entire war was a plot engineered by an underground cult of evil lizard worshippers. Unfortunately, Sigurd has no idea what the fuck he's talking about, so this warning falls on deaf ears. At this point, Sigurd has wiped out the entire ruling structure of Verdain and has also occupied its capital and all of its territory. In the process of defending himself, he has unintentionally conquered the entire country. In Chapter 2 of FE4, Sigurd now governs Verdain from Evan's castle and is now happily married to Deirdre after having only 2 conversations with her, making their marriage only slightly faster than most Fire Emblem marriages, which tend to take at least 3. Meanwhile, Prince Jagal of Augustria, under the influence of Manfroy, has assassinated his father to assume the throne. He moves to violate the peace treaty and attack Granville while it is vulnerable. Against the advice of his sister Lachesis, Eldigan goes directly to the king to try to convince him to stop the war, but Chagall sees him as a threat and imprisons him, leaving Nordian vulnerable. Hairhine identifies his weakness, and Elliot moves to get back at Eldigan by leading a force to attack Nordian. Lachesis requests help from Sigurd, and Sigurd, having found justification for yet another defensive war, immediately rides to defend his longtime friend's home. I start the map by doing some arena, which has refreshed since the last chapter. In chapter 2, by defeating the 7th enemy, we impress the gladiator Holland and recruit him into our army, but I am once again too eager to get the free resources and end up damaging most of my army down to 1 HP. Lachesis defends Nordian Castle with 3 green unit NPC cavaliers who have nearly identical portraits. If all 3 live through this entire map, you can get a Knight Ring, which is a good item which can grant cancel to foot units. Unfortunately, these NPC cavaliers can easily die before you reach them. Since most of my army is severely wounded because of my decisions, I have to leave most of them behind, and Sigurd charges in alone. A bit of a tussle ensues, and I somehow manage to save all the cavaliers. I talk to Lachesis to recruit her, and I defeat the rest of the Hairhine forces and kill Elliot. Even though the immediate threat is nullified, Sigurd simply cannot stop himself, and moves to conquer Hairhine in retaliation. I lure in Hairhine's defensive force by moving Sigurd into range, and then bring my full force to bear to take them down. The green unit cavaliers charge in recklessly, but they are surprisingly strong and do a lot of work. I move in and defeat the squad commander Philip, and keep going, having Sigurd besiege Castle Hairhine and killing Lord Bordeaux in the process, extinguishing yet another family line and launching yet another preemptive invasion in self-defense. Despite King Chagall's posturing, Augustria's lords fight among themselves and do not form a united front against Granville, and this allows Sigurd to defeat Augustria's lords one by one with a relatively small force. While Hairhine was being ravaged by Sigurd's army, Lord Macbeth of Infinity sent Bergen to loot the countryside for profit, and Lord Clement of Mackley chooses to be neutral in the conflict. In response to this barbarism, Sigurd now rides north to defend innocent villagers, which will coincidentally result in him conquering even more territory. A bard named Lewin and his groupie dancer Sylvia shows up to defeat bandits raiding the countryside, which is very easy because all of them prioritize destroying villages instead of fighting. Chagall chastises Macbeth for prioritizing personal profit, and so the Lord of Anthony deploys mercenaries to fight Sigurd. I send in Sigurd alone to fight the mercenaries and send in everyone else to the east in anticipation of the next objective because it takes so long to move anyone anywhere. However, I send Arden elsewhere because he has a very useful event on this map. If he goes onto a beach nearby Hairhine, he can find a pursuit ring which allows him to double. It's not useful on him because he has no speed, so its real purpose is to be sold to the pawn shop so it can be traded to a better character. Sigurd can easily defeat all of the sword cavaliers, but one of them is recruitable, so I lure them back to the castle and manage to trigger the talk conversation to recruit the sword cavalier Beowulf by paying him 10,000 gold. However, in doing this, Beowulf gets repeatedly attacked by many of the enemy cavaliers, but he somehow manages to live. I hide Beowulf into the castle and use a warp staff to move Quan over to aid in defending the area, allowing me to clear all the mercenaries. With this wave taken care of, I send Sigurd northwards to assault Anthony Castle, and he clears the entire army by himself. I then have Sigurd besiege Anthony, slaying Lord Macbeth and adding yet another castle to his collection. After seizing Anthony, Sigurd is informed of a plot against him and his father, but doesn't know what to do about it, so he just decides to keep conquering cities. Meanwhile, the formerly neutral Augustrian Lord Clement is frightened by how far Sigurd has progressed in such a short time, and readies his troops and ballista to defend Mackley. At this point, this crisis has grown to a full-scale war for no real reason. Around this time, the Silesian Pegasus Knight Erenris searches for the runaway Prince Lewin at the Augustrian capital Augusti, but King Chagall manages to trick her into thinking that Lewin has been kidnapped by local warmonger Sigurd, so she and her Pegasus Knights move to attack Evans' castle to mount a rescue operation. I send Lewin back to Evans to intercept her, but they move so slowly that it takes a very long time for them to reach the castle. After spamming end turn for ages, I have Lewin talk to her to recruit her to the team, though the fact that I had Lewin kill her entire squad in cold blood just moments before is conspicuously not mentioned. Meanwhile, at Mackley Castle, I allow the Green Unit Cavaliers to charge in suicidally to soak up hits, and 2 of them die, disqualifying me from getting the reward, but fortunately, I don't care. I use Sigurd to clean up the Macaulay forces as he has so much defense that none of the enemies can hurt him at all. The boss at Macaulay Castle has a sleep staff which, like all enemy weapons in this game, has infinite durability, meaning that I cannot just run it out of uses. Luckily, Sigurd has enough movement to just go in and attack the boss from outside his sleep staff range, allowing me to kill Lord Clement and seize Macaulay Castle immediately. It is at this point that Sigurd has a conversation with Lewin. Lewin admonishes Sigurd for starting war after war and ruining the lives of the common people, and Sigurd realizes that he hasn't even thought about how war is bad and seriously considers withdrawing immediately and seeking a diplomatic solution. But then Lewin immediately reverses course and uses equally persuasive logic to convince him that he shouldn't stop because this war is actually justified, and Sigurd just kinda goes along with it. King Chagall begins to panic as his delusions of grandeur start crashing down around him. He deploys his remaining forces as the last line of defense and begs Manfroy for a solution to the conflict. Manfroy suggests that Chagall should free Eldigan to try to get him to talk to Sigurd, but this plan doesn't really end up working out. Meanwhile, a Lopterian messenger informs Manfroy that they have successfully managed to assassinate Prince Kurth, Prince of Granville, and that Duke Arvis is supporting their plan, forced to cooperate with them, lest knowledge of his lobster blood being leaked. Augustra's forces are a little frightening, mainly because the squad commander Zane has a horse slayer. I have Sigurd fight the Augustrian army, but suddenly get jump scared by the boss's effective weapon, which does tremendous but not lethal damage. Effective weapons in FE4 work differently than in other games. Instead of tripling the weapon's might, all they do is an automatic crit, which while powerful is rarely lethal on its own. Sigurd survives his hit and kills the boss in retaliation, and the rest of the army is no big deal since none of them can actually harm Sigurd because his defense is too high. At this point, the last Green Unit Cavalier charges in and dies and uses this opportunity to feed some kills to Lewin. After annihilating Chagall's remaining forces, Sigurd defeats Chagall himself to seize Augusti, but the king is rescued by Eldigan at the last second because of his chivalrous loyalty to the Augustrian throne. Eldigan is rightfully indignant that in the short time he's been in prison, Sigurd has accidentally conquered most of his country and asks his old friend if he has an explanation for this, and Sigurd really does not, because he just kinda got carried away by acting without thinking of the consequences. Sigurd tells Eldigan that he just needs a year to restore order and then he'll leave, and Eldigan, trusting in his friend's knightly honor, agrees. In Chapter 3 of FE4, 6 months have passed, and Chagall, now based at Medino Castle, has raised an army to retake the capital. Meanwhile, Sigurd has found it to be very difficult to withdraw his troops from Augusti and has also had a child with Deirdre. From this, we can tell that Sigurd does not know how to pull out. Enemy soldiers start arriving, forcing Sigurd to once again retaliate for his own protection. I make sure to trigger the talk convo between Ira and Lex to get the Brave Sword, which is probably one of the best weapons in the whole game. I could ride out with all my units, but I find it to be much easier to stay hunkered down at the home castle. I leave everyone inside and have Lewin on the castle, where he clears entire waves of enemies and gains a ton of experience. Training Lewin will be very useful because while Sigurd is strong, he doesn't have very much resistance, so fighting large groups of mages is sketchy. After clearing all the attackers, I send Sigurd out alone to farm kills on his javelin. In FE4, killing 50 enemies with a single weapon will grant anyone who uses it the critical skill, and farming up to 100 kills in total will additionally grant plus 50% critical rate, so I decided to put some effort into farming a 100 kill javelin that I can pass on to the next generation. Sigurd clears Medino's defenses and kills Jacobi, the mercenary commander who guards the castle. Upon seizing Medino, Sigurd encounters Father Claude of Edda, who informs him that Prince Kurth is dead and Sigurd's father, Duke Byron, has been implicated in the crime, but all is not lost as Claude leaves to go to the Tower of Bragi to try to glean some evidence to clear Byron's name. Meanwhile, Deirdre, who has been left behind at Augusti to care for her child, suddenly decides to go out on her own to find Sigurd, but she's immediately brainwashed and kidnapped by Manfroy. In response to Sigurd's counterattack, Eldigan and his cross knights move out to defend what remains of the kingdom. I move Sigurd around in one big circle to try to avoid him entirely because there's a funny interaction if you defeat Chagall before dealing with Eldigan. If you do that, then Eldigan will just disappear from the map entirely, and for the sake of the plot, the story just acts as if he died anyway. Unfortunately, the cross knights move in on my home castle too quickly, so this is a moot point. Eldigan is a very powerful combatant who has a high chance of instantly killing my units with critical hits, and I don't really have the tools to fight him properly. So instead I go for the alternative approach, which is having Lachesis talk to him. She manages to convince her brother to stop fighting, and Eldigan tries his diplomatic approach one last time. Unfortunately, he tries this in the stupidest way possible, by going back to his king alone and undefended, as he is immediately declared a traitor and is summarily executed. This handles Eldigan, but the rest of the Cross Knights still remain on the map. I end up deploying most of my army just to make sure they don't seize my home castle, resulting in the deaths of Du and Azel. Meanwhile, Chagall has hired Thracian Draco Knights from King Shavon to help his campaign, so I have Sigurd move back to deal with them. Sigurd moves in and slays the Draco Knight squad commander, and I defend my castle with Lewin, who managed to clear the remaining Cross Knights and Draco Knights with ease. I walk Sigurd all the way back to Silvile and defeat Chagall once again, and he dies rather unceremoniously. This ends the war between Grandville and Augustria because Augustria has ceased to be. Upon hearing of Augustria's defeat in the war, the pirates of Orcahill mutiny and oust Brigid, who is also Avil from FE5, and begin raiding the countryside to take advantage of the chaos. Around the same time, Claude has finished his investigation at Braggy Tower and is accompanied by Teotihu, who is a Phrygian mage. Claude has found evidence of the Granville conspiracy and has even managed to find the Valkyria staff, which can bring people back to life, though unfortunately he'll never get the chance to use it. Brigid, Claude, and Teotihu become controllable, but they are on the other side of the map and surrounded by pirates. As I spend time doing inventory management, I repeatedly forget to move these newly acquired characters, which ends up getting all 3 of them killed, and they all die, which is regrettable. I have Quan and Ethelyn trigger a conversation to get Quan the Gay Book, which is a holy weapon that has no real purpose this late in the map, and do some inheritance management. Since Quan, Ethelyn, and Finn will leave the team at the end of this chapter, I use the pawn shop to trade Sigurd's powered up silver sword to Ethelyn to eventually pass it down to Leaf, and also move Sigurd's power up javelin to Finn, who will keep it for the 2nd generation. I use the brave sword I acquired this map to defeat pirates. Beating it kills, and I quickly seize the pirate castles to end the map. Unfortunately, while Sigurd was dealing with the pirate problem, the Granville conspirators strike. Duke Lombard and Chancellor Reptar arrive with armies to arrest Sigurd, backing him into a corner. Fortunately, Silesian Pegasus Knights arrive to escort him, granting him asylum across the sea until his name can be cleared. In Chapter 4 of FE4, Sigurd takes refuge in the neutral nation of Silesia, which is currently undergoing a succession crisis. Queen Lana has moved Sigurd and his forces to the small city of Ceylan, seemingly out of goodwill, but also because he is a fucking super soldier who can slay entire armies by himself, which is a great thing to have when a civil war is imminent. As such, Sigurd has also accidentally usurped Prince Lewin's position as his mother's favorite child. At this point, Quan, Ethelyn, and Finn decide to depart to return to Leinster and come back with reinforcements. They leave the army, taking all their items with them. Duke Miles of Tofa, the queen's brother-in-law, decides to press his claim for the Silesian throne and moves out with his forces to attack Ceylan. To fight them, I have pooled resources into Lewin. I have given him the pursuit ring and enough XP to promote him into Sage, making him incredibly strong. This map is full of mages who Sigurd cannot easily handle, so I have Lewin guard the castle and spam wait turn so he can deal with the first wave of enemies. After defeating Dithorba, the first squad is cleared, but unfortunately the second squad moves in shortly after. Lewin gets hit with a sleep staff, which he was one resistance off of resisting, so horrifyingly I'm forced to think. I lean forward in my gamer chair and send forces out of the castle to perform hit and run attacks, which allows me to kill multiple enemy mages before they can attack a sleeping Lewin. But unfortunately, an enemy mage occupies the gate tile, which stops me from deploying anyone onto the map from inside the castle. The enemy sleep staff user has infinite uses and has guaranteed hits, so it is possible that I could get softlocked here, with Lewin being chained sleep and the castle gate being perpetually blocked. Fortunately, after waiting a few turns, the sleep status wears off at the start of player phase, allowing me to have Lewin kill the enemy mage blocking the gate, so I can mobilize the rest of my forces to clear the mages. I move out and clean up the stragglers with Sigurd, but unfortunately the enemy simply raised the bridge leading to their castle, meaning that I cannot cross. You can only open the bridge if you have a thief, namely the character Du, who is dead in my playthrough, so I have to take the long way around, which is by having my units walk through dozens of tiles of snowy mountain terrain. FE4 truly is a Strand type game. Sigurd clears the castle guards and slays males, seizing Tofa Castle. Sigurd meets the village elder and is surprised that for the first time the people are not upset. In fact, they are happy that he has slain their leader and liberated their territory. While Sigurd's army is busy at Tofa, the other claimant to the throne, Duke Dakar of Zaxxon, deploys his forces to assault the capital city. city. Pamela's Pegasus unit flies from Zaxxon to attack Silesia, while Anon defends the city with her evenly matched squad of Pegasus Knights. However, Dakar has the aid of Granville reinforcements in the form of House Yingvi's Bone Knights, which greatly tips the balance in their favor. I use the return band to immediately teleport Sigurd back to my home castle so I can reach Silesia more or less immediately, only to find that the land route is completely blocked off by a neutral unit and I cannot pass. This event is more or less a long cutscene where you are forced to watch a gigantic NPC battle and you cannot even enter the area until it is concluded. Anon's forces briefly skirmish with Pamela's troops before the Young Bone Knights move in and massacre them all with their bows. With Silesia's forces completely destroyed, the Zaxxon forces immediately move and seize the capital, and with their task complete, the Youngbi forces withdraw to Granville. Only now does the neutral unit blocking the path to the capital disappear, allowing me to move in troops to assist. Helpless civilians flee the city, and while several of them are killed by enemy forces, I managed to rescue a few of them with Lewin to get free level ups as a reward. Pamela's troops go north and burn Tofa to the ground, which oh well, so I pull my forces back to deal with the rampaging Pegasus Knights, and I have Sigurd kill Pamela, but the remaining enemies do not even bother initiating attacks because Sigurd has too much defense, so I'm forced to slowly kill them one by one on player phase, but eventually I clear them all and I take out the commander Donovan, allowing me to seize Silesia and liberate the capital. I have Lewin visit the capital where he is given the legendary Forseti tome by his mother, which grants him the power of the Wind Crusader, which is supposedly one of peace and understanding. However, the Forseti tome also doubles as a weapon of extreme violence as it makes Lewin into an absolute monster in combat who can dodge tank and kill nearly any enemy in one round. The final battle on this map is actually quite concerning, with the boss's squad having killer bows and sleep swords, so I advance with caution. Sending out only one unit could result in a comical series of events where they are put to sleep by a low percent hit and then repeatedly crit until they die. So I move out with a much larger squad than normal, consisting of 4 characters, and bait attacks with Forseti. I cover away enough of the enemies by the time they reach Silesia that I'm able to go for the kill on the boss. I attack with Lewin, and Lewin one-shots Lamia with a Forseti critical for 124 damage, and I clean up enough of the remaining enemies that the rest are no longer a threat. I have Sigurd charge towards the final castle and finish off Duke Dakar to seize Zaxxon, concluding the Silesian Civil War. After winning his 3rd war, Sigurd is soon dragged into a 4th when he discovers that Duke Lombard of Granville is rapidly approaching. Sigurd knows that Lombard is only there for him, so he decides that he would rather not be on the defense, and decides to preemptively attack before they can invade Silesia. In Chapter 5 of FE4, Duke Arvis has convinced King Asmer that Sigurd and Byron have conspired against the crown, in part because they are harboring Shannon, the Prince of Izak. It is now also revealed that Arvis has married his half-sister Deidre, the long-lost grandchild of the king, which will definitely not result in the revival of the Dark God Loptus. Meanwhile, Duke Lombard, one of the core conspirators, has defeated House Chalfie's forces, but Duke Byron, Sigurd's father, has managed to slip away. He is mortally wounded, but he desperately tries to reach his son to give him the Tearfing, his house's legendary weapon, before he expires. I move out with my forces to meet Byron, but the window to reach him is extremely tight. I overestimate the enemy forces and move too cautiously, which results in Byron being targeted and killed immediately on turn 2, meaning that I will not be able to obtain the Tearfing in the 1st generation. We now confront the united forces of House Dozo and House Youngbi, who are no big deal because Lewin and Sigurd are overpowered. Lewin is basically invincible against House Dozo's Axe Knights because with the Forseti, his avoid skyrockets to such insane values that enemies literally have 0 hit against him. House Youngbi's Bow Knights have higher accuracy, so I have Sigurd handle them, which he does easily because he has so much defense that they can barely scratch him. After clearing both armies, I have Sigurd defeat Andre of House Youngbi to avenge Anon's death in the previous chapter, and avenge Duke Byron's death by defeating Duke Lombard. I seize Lubeck Castle, and the first stage of the counterattack is complete with the death of one of the main conspirators, but Sigurd knows that the fight is far from over. He implores Oifi and Shannon to escape to Izak and to take his infant son Selef with them because the situation has become so dangerous. Unfortunately, naive as he is, Sigurd does not realize that doing this is a death flag. Quan and Ethlin return from Leinster with reinforcements, though for some reason Ethlin has brought their 3-year-old daughter, Altena, to the battlefield. They aim to cross the Yi Desert to rendezvous with Sigurd's forces but have been followed by King Trevant and Thracia's Draco Knights, who ambush them in the desert, resulting in a cutscene in the form of a large NPC battle. Leinster's forces stand no chance in the desert, mainly because the entire Thracian army is equipped with horse slayers, and nearly all of Leinster's cavalry victory is destroyed by the effective weapons. But Quan gets very lucky and manages to kill the squad commander Magorn with a lover critical using the Gable. Unfortunately, this victory is short-lived. Soon after, Ethlin is killed and Travant kidnaps Altena, using her as leverage to force Quan to drop his weapon, which results in him being killed shortly afterwards. Now victorious, Travant returns to Thracia with Lester's holy weapon and Quan's daughter, having a conversation with the ghost of the squad commander Magorn, because the game did not expect that he would die so soon. Meanwhile, Arvis discovers that Lombard has been defeated, and his co-conspirator Chancellor Reptor starts panicking because their main forces are far away administering their conquests. Arvis has a talk with Manfroy and loudly remarks that despite working with the Lopter cult, he has no intention of obeying their whims or reviving the Dark God. He resolves to kill Sigurd, in part to fulfill his political ambitions, but also because he's terrified that his wife and half-sister Deidre might recover her memory of her previous marriage. The next castle we need to besiege is Fenora, which is in the middle of the Yi Desert. The sand tiles heavily restricts movement, and there are platforms containing Veltomer meteor mages, which makes passing through difficult. If you have the tier thing, then you can have Sigurd solo this portion of the map and ignore the 30 damage meteors with the plus 20 bonus resistance from the weapon. Unfortunately, since I don't have it, I'll have to move more cautiously. I decided to tackle this problem with Erenris, who is the only fire that you have and the only one who can even reach the meteor mages. I take out both mages with some careful movement and then have everyone charge the castle. Around this same time, the Thracian Draco Knights that wiped out the Leinster forces fly north, led by the specter of the commander Morgorn, who commands them from beyond the grave. I tried to have Lewin deal with them, but he has too much avoid, so much that they refuse to attack him, so they just surround him and sit there. So I have to juggle the Draco Knights, killing them one by one with Lewin while trying to make sure that my other units are not within their range. As I move towards the castle, the boss rains meteors down upon me and kills Beowulf because I forgot to heal him, but I soon defeat the commander Vaha with Sigurd and seize the captured castle Fenora. And after talking to the locals, he hears that the last knights of Leinster were slaughtered by the Thracian Draco Knights, and he only finds out now that his sister Ethlin and brother-in-law Quan are dead. The final battle of the first generation pits Sigurd against Chancellor Reptor of Frege. Reptor stations his forces in wait near Veltomer Castle and will not move until you reach him. The intended approach is to move all your units through the desert, but there are more meteor mages defending the route, so I have Erenris pick them up to clear the path. That said, moving my entire army through the desert is a humongous pain in the ass, so instead I try something else. I use Erenris as bait by placing her into the Phrygian army's range, which causes them to all start slowly moving through the desert, and because of their strange AI, they get stuck. Additionally, once hostilities commence, General Ida and the Veltomer mages betray Frege and start raining meteors down upon them. I realize now that many of my units have accidentally formed marriage pairings, which is not desirable since I want to use substitute units. Even though many units will come to an unfortunate end in an upcoming scripted event, you will still get their child units if they live until that point. So if you want to get the substitute units, the most common method is to kill everyone off before the end of the map. So in order to ensure that I get substitute units in the next generation, I allow the small number of Frege forces that get through the desert to kill everyone except Sigurd and Lewin, who I withdraw back to my home castle to cause the enemy AI to glitch out and become passive. As a result, the Frege forces start fighting the Veltomer meteor mages, and though all of them are eventually killed, the enemy AI is stripped to never attack General Ida, allowing her to eventually kill nearly every enemy unit with meteors without any player intervention. At the end, only Chancellor Reptor remains because of his high avoid and passive healing. I deploy my units, forcing Reptor to walk through the entire Eid Desert to reach me, and then I trivialize him completely by having Lewin use a silent staff to stop him from using his legendary Mjolnir tome, and have Sigurd attack, killing him in a single round with the Brave Sword. With all the conspirators defeated, Sigurd talks to General Ida, who convinces him that Veltomer's recent change in loyalties was because Arvis was on his side all along, and that the Duke has planned a grand celebration featuring smoked meats for Sigurd's heroism. Sigurd, weary of all this conflict, is pleased to hear of this and goes to attend the barbecue. Sigurd travels to Valhalla, where Arvis is waiting with his troops to honor the young lord's victory, in a scene that is so iconic that it defines the game. In fact, it is so famous that I even had a 5-foot-tall body pillow made to depict this event. Sigurd and his remaining forces, which at this point is only Lewin, march down a long line of Veltomer soldiers to meet Arvis, who awaits them with excellent news on this auspicious day. And this excellent news on this fortuitous occasion for Sigurd is that he has been deceived and led into an ambush. For his supposed crimes against Granville, Arvis sentences Sigurd to death. And as a final insult, Arvis brings out his wife, Princess Deidre, who notably is also Sigurd's wife, to taunt him one last time and to confirm that she retains no memory of her past life. Sigurd takes immense psychic damage as Deidre does not recognize him, and Arvis gives the final command to burn Sigurd's army alive. The Veltomer fire mages launch their meteors, which would normally target your troops, but in my case only strikes a large amount of empty space because I preemptively killed most of my own forces. Finally, Arvis personally barbecues Sigurd with a Holy Tome Valve Flame, which unfortunately in the translation patch has a bugged animation. Sigurd, our main character, is set aflame, and the young Chalfie Lord perishes, concluding the first generation of Fire Emblem 4 Genealogy Holy War, with the fiery deaths of nearly every character you have gotten to know up until this point. 17 years pass after the fateful massacre at Valhalla, and Arvis has united the Jugjo continent to become the first emperor of the newly minted Granville Empire. Under the empire's rule, Izak is tormented by the tyrannical rule of the appointed King Danin, and a liberation army has risen up in rebellion against this oppression. It is led by Prince Shannon, rightful ruler of Izak, and Selef, the son of Sigurd and inheritor of the Crusaders' legacy. Danin hunts the rebels and tracks them to the hidden village of Tiranaug, where the children of Sigurd's allies would be hidden if they didn't all cease to exist because of their parents' premature deaths. Selef is alerted to an incoming assault from Empire forces, and their haven now exposed, decides to raise the flags of rebellion in foe. Normally at this point, you'll be joined by the children of first-generation characters, but unfortunately, since their parents died too early, we instead get substitute nobodies called Radney, Rotobon, and Mana, and they are all categorically worse than their counterparts. Substitute units lack the strong growths and skills of child units and inherit nothing from the first generation, and while not all of them are useless, most of them kind of are. Suffice to say, this will make the second generation much more difficult than it normally should be. In Chapter 6 of FE4, Selef assembles his Thorbrand comrades and sets out to liberate Izak. Our new protagonist has inherited all of Sigurd's equipment, including a 100-kill brave sword and nearly every ring, giving him an incredible start. On turn 3, we get even more reinforcements, including Oifi from the first generation and 2 more substitute units called Tristan and Dimna. Oifi is a useful pre-promote, but the substitutes kind of suck. I move forward with Selef, getting easy kills with brave sword crits to take advantage of the inherited Paragon ring for bonus experience. I move to besiege Ganashire, which is defended by General Harold, who has a very recognizable generic sprite, and he is easily killed. Upon seizing the first castle, we meet Lewin, who is somehow alive despite greatly exceeding his recommended lifetime meteor dosage. Lewin asks Selef to protect Julia, a mysterious girl that he found in Valhalla, who unbeknownst to Selef is his half-sister and a product of the incestuous union between Arvis and Deidre. And speaking of incest, the marriage system in FE4 works on a point-based system. There is a strange interaction where if you never load from a map save, Julia and Selef start with 490 out of 500 love points, putting them very close to the marriage threshold. Some might call this a glitch, but I think it's more humorous to consider it a reward for Ironmanning the game. Selef and Julia have a negative love growth, making it impossible for them to marry under normal circumstances. But you can overcome this chromosomal hurdle by using the jealousy mechanic. To do this, I place Selef next to Radney and Mana, and then Julia diagonal from Selef into a square formation, causing her to leech the love point gain from Radney and Mana. This is enough to overcome the negative love growth and makes the incest pairing possible. And you can accomplish it in as few as 2 turns because of the high starting love value. Naturally, I opt to make this unnatural union to immediately have Selef marry his half-sister. Meanwhile, King Danin has caught wind of the Liberation Army's recent victories and sends his 2 sons to put down the rebels. And 2 more substitute units join the army, namely Ahmed the Mage and Femina the Pegasus Knight, and they're both quite bad. Danin's 2 sons, Johan and Johavier, advance towards us, but you can recruit one of the 2 brothers by having Radney talk to one of them. I decide to recruit Johan because he's closer, and he betrays his family because he has a crush on a mediocre substitute sword fighter. All of his Axe Cavaliers turn with him and they become allied units. The other brother, Johavier, is now no longer recruitable, so I kill him with Selef. After this, there is another important branching decision based on which city you seize first. If you seize Sofara first, then you'll get the Aura Tome, but if you seize Izak, then you'll get Nosferatu. Nosferatu is incredibly strong in nearly every Fire Emblem game where it exists, so the choice is obvious. At this point, Selef has already snowballed in power and can handle the rest of the map on his own. Selef defeats the enemy armies to seize Izak and obtains Nosferatu Tome, which is an excellent gift for his sister wife. The final battle of this map is King Danin, who sits on Revolt Castle without any ranged weapons. I repeatedly attack with Julia to get some free XP before I get tired and just have Selef kill him, liberating Izak from Empire rule. In the closing cutscene, Selef talks to Lewin, who gives expository dialogue on what happened during the 17-year time skip. Emperor Arvis ruled well for some time, but recently the empire has changed into an oppressive force dominated by the Loptir cult. Children are kidnapped as ritual sacrifices for the dark god Loptus, and all resistance is quelled with extreme violence. Lewin tells Celev that it is his destiny to save Jugdro, and that Sigurd's legacy, and more importantly, his history of tax evasion will aid him in doing so. Sigurd's large investments into fancy jewelry and non-monetary assets allowed him to transfer considerable wealth to his son, while concealing the true value of his estate to evade inheritance taxes. In Chapter 7 of FE4, Prince Leif of Leinster, son of Quan and Ethlin, has also risen up in a revolt against the Empire, but has lost his entire army after a poorly executed raid on Ulster. Notably, this is the same event that is also depicted in Chapter 19 of Fire Emblem 5, Thracia 776. However, Fire Emblem 4's Leif has clearly bungled his entire playthrough, as he has gotten everyone killed and only has 2 units left, namely Finn from the first generation and the substitute unit John. Meanwhile, Prince Shannon has recovered the Holy Sword Balmung from a shrine in the Ede Desert, but the substitute unit Daisy managed to get it first. Shannon is a strong combat unit who can easily one-round enemies, while Daisy is a thief who is not good at combat, but in a substitute playthrough is useful for transferring gold to other units. They both start in a precarious situation nearby several enemies at the first castle that we need to conquer, which lies on a plateau in the Ede Desert. The way there, however, is covered in sand which restricts movement, making the approach quite tedious, so I choose to only send Celev. Celev at this point is quite strong and has already managed to promote and become a mounted unit. However, as I move him forward, I forget that I have other controllable units on the other side of the map, and I do not move Daisy, which causes her to be one-shot immediately on turn 1, and Shannon also dies shortly afterwards. This is not good, as from this one blunder, I have lost my only thief, and also one of the few second generation units that is any good in this playthrough. Meanwhile, Leif, Finn, and John are also being assaulted by enemy forces, and I also repeatedly forgot to move them, but fortunately they fare better because Finn has kept the 100 kill javelin to the previous generation, allowing him to do quite well in repelling the Frege forces, allowing me to stabilize the situation at Leinster. I have Celev charge to the desert around the winding path of the castle, and with his high avoid he's able to dodge the boss's Benrir tome, and slays the boss with his brave sword, allowing him to seize Ede Castle. There, Celev talks with Lewin about the historical oppression of the Loptir cult, providing a tiny amount of moral ambiguity to the one-dimensional villains of the story. Hearing of the fall of Ede Castle, Prince Ishtor and General Liza of Frege assembled their forces at Melgen, fanning out into a large formation featuring ballistas and siege tomes, which is a big concern. While Celev is strong, his resistance is rather lacking, so sending him alone to fight a large number of mages is not ideal. So I decided to take a small detour to train Julia and endeavor finance by Celev's secret trust fund. Gold is normally not tradable in FE4, but married units can transfer all of their money to their spouse, allowing me to power level Julia specifically because I decided to tangle up her and Celev's family trees. By using her brother husband's family fortune, Julia is able to kit herself out with powerful items such as the Bargain Band and Paragon Ring, and I allocate her the return stat so she can repeatedly spam return to gain 60 XP per action, allowing her to gain levels incredibly quickly. Celev's generational wealth provides enough funds to repeatedly repair the return stat, allowing me to grind Julia all the way to level 30. And while this sounds very degenerate, this is actually standard practice for training staff users in most FE4 playthroughs, and with emulator speed up, it's actually surprisingly fast, only taking it around 15 minutes to complete. I move Celev and Julia across the entire map over to Melgen, and use hit and run attacks and lure individual enemies out, before realizing that I can just throw Julia in to kill everything with Nosferatu. So I park Julia just outside of enemy ballista range, and do just that. Julia slaughters Liza and her entire battalion with ease, taking very little damage because of her high resistance, and recovering any that she actually takes with Nosferatu. Celev takes care of the ballista, and I have Julia attack Ishtor. I was informed beforehand that Ishtor might be somewhat difficult, but as it turns out, a level 30 Julia makes short work of him. Celev seizes Melgen and ponders over whether the people they killed were truly evil or not, but Lewin tells him to not think too hard about it because they only had 5 lines of dialogue anyway. Behind us, Lord Bramsel and his mercenary lieutenant Javaro lie in wait at Dana and decide that it is time to strike. Ares, the son of Eldigan and wielder of the Demon Blade Mistletoe, is a mercenary in Javaro's employ, but has a disagreement with Bramsel over his inappropriate treatment of the substitute dancer Laylee, so he defects and becomes an allied unit. Despite being known as the Black Knight in FE4 canon, I think it more accurate to consider him the White Knight because the majority of his dialogue centers around this particular scene. Ares is one of the guaranteed child units in the second generation and is very strong, so I will have to rely on him for a good portion of the endgame. I move Celev up to support Ares, allowing me to defeat Javaro's forces and push all the way back to Dana, soon after killing Bramsel to conquer the castle. At this point, I have Ares enter to recruit Laylee, who is a substitute dancer that is arguably better than the normal dancer unit that you get, because she gets the charm skill, which can improve your odds in some of the harder fights in the endgame. And in this playthrough, this is the last time that Ares will ever speak, because all of his future dialogues depend on Nana existing, but Nana does not exist. King Bloom of Frege sends his forces to capture Leinster, so I quickly have Finn, Leif, and John retreat along the coast to join them with the rest of my troops. I use this opportunity to pass Finn's 100-kill javelin to Seliph to complete Sigurd's plan of passing down even more assets to his child via methods untraceable by Granville tax collectors. Bloom sends Linda, a crappy substitute mage, to attack us, so I send Julia to handle her and her squad. At level 30, Julia has enough resistance to the point where the enemies refuse to attack her, allowing me to wall them off completely. Fire Emblem 4 has a mechanic where some enemy commanders whose troops are defeated will retreat and come back with more soldiers, providing an infinite number of enemies to slay if you are patient enough. And Linda is one of those commanders, giving me the opportunity to do something very funny. While Julia is already strong, I decided to make her even stronger by grinding 100 kills for her Nosferatu tome, by repeatedly killing Linda's squad every time it is replenished. And this 100 kill Nosferatu gives Julia a plus 50% critical chance and makes her comically lethal and capable of killing anyone that she so much looks at. After inflicting untold amounts of trauma on Linda by repeatedly killing soldiers under her employ, I finally choose to recruit her by having her brother Ahmed talk to her. With all the enemy forces taken care of, I defeat King Bloom to seize Oster Castle and end the map. Bloom is unfortunately able to retreat, but this withdrawal allows the Liberation Army to carve out a foothold on the Thracian Peninsula. In Chapter 8 of FE4, King Bloom's recent defeat has destabilized the Thracian Peninsula, as the opportunistic King Trevant of Thracia withholds reinforcements to let the Liberation Army and Empire forces tire each other out. Bloom sends two forces to attack us, sending the General Muhammad to attack Oster and Ovo to attack Leinster. In response, Leif, Finn, and John depart to protect Leinster, but they are too weak to survive. As the map starts, I have Leif cheese the arena using Sigurd's 100-kill silver sword to fish for critical hits, granting him enough gold to buy the Paragon ring from the shop. Leif has a very rough start, but once he promotes, he becomes quite formidable, and is probably one of the best combat units I have access to. After this, I immediately have Leif, Finn, and John abandon the city, and Ovo's army reduces it into a pile of smoking rubble. The first general approaches, and for some reason he inexplicably has Jagal's portrait from the first generation. I have Seliph slay him with a 100-kill javelin, and use the enemies to feed XP into Leif and Ares. After Ovo arrives from turning Leinster into a desolate crater, I have Julia kill him and most of his squad with Nosferatu. Bloom also sends his daughter Ishtar and the substitute bowfighter Asaello to fight us. Ishtar is quite formidable, but if you wait until turn 13, she just leaves before reaching you. Asaello is unfortunately unrecruitable in my circumstances because his sister Daisy died on turn 1 in chapter 7, so I have to kill her. I move forward and break through the defensive formation at Connaught in order to kill King Bloom and seize the castle. After the death of Bloom and the retreat of Empire forces, King Trevant attacks the recently liberated city of Munster with squads of Wyvern Knights to reclaim Thracian territory. His adopted daughter Altena, who was kidnapped from her parents Quan and Ethlin after a fateful desert ambush, objects to his brutal methods, but Trevant stands by his policy of killing anyone that stands in his way, including children armed with sticks, which is a reasonably accurate portrayal of the strength of my substitute unit army. In this playthrough, Sed does not exist, since Erenris died sad and alone, so he is replaced by the substitute unit Hawk, who is an amazing unit because he has pursuit, adept, and very high base stats. Hawk defends Munster on his gate, while several civilians run north to escape the incoming battle. I have Leif rescue villagers for free level ups, and have Seliph go to Munster to recruit Hawk. Multiple large squads of Draco Knights approach, so I try to have Seliph enemy phase him with a javelin, but he has too much defense, so they largely ignore him. Hawk is good, but not good enough to dodge tank 30 wyverns on his joining map, so I station Julia at the castle to attract some attention, and she successfully clears a huge amount of wyverns with Nosferatu. With the immediate danger handled, I clear the remaining enemy forces and have Seliph defeat General Makov to seize meat and complete the chapter. Lewin takes the opportunity to explain to Seliph that Thracia has numerous historical, geopolitical, and socio-economic factors influencing its militant and aggressive national policy, but do not let that stop him from killing every last one of them. In Chapter 9 of FE4, Thracia takes up arms against the Liberation Army in preparation for a full-scale war. King Trevant is indignant that his kidnapped adopted daughter, Altena, refused to commit atrocities in the previous chapter and gives her one last chance to redeem herself by launching the first attack. attack. And with this underway, he also travels to Cappadocia to blackmail General Hannibal into fighting us by taking his adopted son hostage. I start the map and manage to promote Ares and Leaf, granting them both significant bonuses. Ares mainly gains stats, while Leaf gains a mount, the pursuit skill, and an A weapon rank in nearly every weapon type except for light magic. Many items that are not inherited from the first generation can still show up in the second generation, and in this case, Lewin's former Elwyn tome, which had 67 kills on it, is available for purchase in the blacksmith shop, so I've hawked by this great value for Seti for a relatively cheap price. I prepare Julia to fight Altena's squad, positioning her in a manner that allows her to kill most of the Wyvern Knights in one turn, while leaving Altena herself alone. I then have Leaf talk to Altena, telling her the truth of her lineage, which immediately results in her having an existential crisis. Confused, she returns to Thracia Castle, where Shervant confirms the truth of the story, and after a brief scuffle, Altena is seemingly struck down by her not blood-related brother Arion. After witnessing this scene, Shervant decides to launch a suicide attack, leaving the holy weapon Gungnir and the future of Thracia in Arion's hands. Shervant's squad moves towards us in a similar formation to Altena, putting them in a perfect position to all be killed on enemy phase by Julia's Nosferatu. Shervant himself, as a boss, is not anything particularly special, and I have Julia attack him on player phase, killing him in one round without any difficulty. Around this time, Hannibal becomes aggressive and starts moving towards us, so I have to hurry. Hannibal is not the best unit, but he is recruitable if you recruit his adopted son and trigger a talk conversation, which can be surprisingly tricky to do because you have to move past Hannibal without defeating him, and you have to do it rather quickly. Selef is fortunately able to handle a good chunk of Hannibal's army and also run past him because of his superior movement, allowing me to attack Disler at Lutetia and capture the castle to rescue the Thracian general's adopted son. But a problem arises because getting Charlotte to Hannibal is itself quite a task because Lutetia Castle is extremely far away. After Shervant's death, Arion reveals that he didn't kill Altena but had to put on a show for his father, who is now dead. Altena tried to convince her not blood-related brother to call for a truce. Arion is extremely conflicted because in addition to inheriting his father's holy blood, he has also inherited being a Tsundere. Arion tells his not blood-related sister to join Prince Leaf and resolves to fight until the end. Altena flies towards her home castle, and I very quickly have Selef use the return band to teleport back to the home castle to recruit her. Altena is one of the few flying units that you get, and she's extremely important if you want to get the tier thing in chapter 10. I give her Finn's Brave Lance and train her in the arena, which makes it all the more unfortunate that I accidentally get her killed by leaving her in range of one of Hannibal's archers. This is quite bad, but I do manage to have Leaf charge through Hannibal's army to use the return staff on Charlo, teleporting him back to my home castle and allowing for an easy Hannibal recruitment. Charlo is one of the better substitute units to get, as he has a unique event with Hannibal that grants him a berserk staff, which is the only way to obtain this powerful tool. Now that Altena is dead, I am in big trouble because getting the tier thing is quite difficult without a strong flyer or a very well-developed ground army, and I currently have neither. Mounted reinforcements come from Granville, and I have Leaf set on Cappadocia to handle them. Leaf is strong enough to defeat nearly all of the enemies, except for 2 paladins who do not have weapons and thus cannot die on enemy phase. Instead, they are equipped with only healing staves, and here lies an opportunity for theoretically infinite XP. Since enemy weapons and staves are all infinite use, I'm able to repeatedly attack these 2 paladins to get as much XP as I want on units, as long as they are too weak to defeat them in one round, which for me is probably my entire army. And as such, I decided to train the substitute Pegasus Knight Femina, who is really bad because she doesn't even have the pursuit skill, and so cannot double naturally. This, combined with her low strength, makes her hit like a wet needle covered in topical anesthetic. But she is the only remaining flyer that I have, and as such is the only chance I have at getting the tier thing. I repeatedly attack paladins with chip EXP, eventually reaching level 30, and after transferring herself's Brave Sword, Power Ring, Barrier Ring, and Skill Ring, she is just barely strong enough to one-shot Dark Sorcerers in chapter 10, which makes getting the tier thing possible. And to top off her stats, I have her go to a village in the upper left to get a conversation with an imposter Shannon who gives her extra defense. I consider training the rest of my scrubs, and my first pick is John, but she is so incredibly bad that her utility at level 30 is identical to her utility at base level. Discouraged by the unsurprising reality that substitute units are complete crap, I choose not to train anyone else with this method because I was getting very tired. After executing the 2 paladins for their service, I have Selef charge past Grutia's Ballista to seize the castle and trigger the final phase of the map. Arion leaves Castle Thracia with 46 Draco Knights and sends 30 of them on an assault, but they are easily defeated by Hawk and Selef when they arrive at the home castle. But now I need to figure out how to handle Arion, who is a formidable foe. He He is extremely lethal with the Gugnir and Adept and has 37 defense, which makes it very difficult to deal physical damage to him, as his Nihil skill makes it impossible to land critical hits. Fortunately, I have Julia, who can do an absolute ton of magic damage and can probably one-round him with Adept, so I sent her forward to Nosferatu tank his soldiers, but unfortunately, one of them hits her with a sleep sword, activating a 3% chance to put her to sleep. Now helpless and unable to fight, she is soon easily defeated. Fortunately, Julia has a special mechanic where she cannot die permanently because of plot reasons until the final chapter, so she will rejoin the army once the chapter is complete. But this does mean that I don't really have a way to kill Arion, so I'm forced to deal with him by luring him out and then using Silif's superior movement to juke and outrun him, speeding past his entire army to seize Castle Thracia, which has been left completely undefended. Upon seizing the castle, Thracia's entire army evaporates, including Arion, who is teleported away by Prince Julius. In Chapter 10 of FE4, Seliph marches on Granville, where Julius declares to Ishtar that he will take kidnapped children to Valhalla and groom them personally. Meanwhile, Julia returns to the army after being absolutely wrecked in the last chapter, but is immediately kidnapped by a teleporting Manfroy. The main enemy army is commanded by General Riddell, who is sick and tired of hunting children, so he is assigned the honorable knightly task of hunting children. Riddell moves out at a leisurely pace, meaning that you have time to rescue the civilians if you hurry. I don't care enough to do that. The first obstacle is an impressive formation of dark mages who are armed with infinite use sleep staves and hell tomes. Sleep staves put low resistance units out of commission for 5 turns, and hell tomes can reduce any unit's HP to 1, allowing them to be killed by any follow-up attack. Fortunately, Helltones have a low hit rate, so if we dodge them, they are no big concern. As such, I move out with a much larger army than usual, since at this point, the enemy formations are too tough to crack with a single unit. I leverage the strength of Seliph, Leaf, Ares, and my Dancer to move quickly, obliterating the Dark Mages and advancing to secure the castles. Unfortunately, all the civilians are slaughtered, but they hardly matter at this point, because all they provide for rescuing them is bonus experience, and many of my useful units have already reached their level cap. I lure out Riddell's army and defeat them with overwhelming force, and then move on to the 2 nearby castles, which are now sparsely defended. I defeat Hilda with Ares, conquering Kronos' castle, and then send Ares alone to Rados in order to save some effort. Unfortunately, I forget that these enemies are armed with Helltomes. Ares is struck with a 45% hit Helltome, reducing him to 1 HP, and is then finished off with Fenrir from a long range, killing him and causing me to lose access to the only holy weapon that I have at the moment, meaning that if I fail to get the Tearfing, there's a realistic possibility that this run ends in a soft lock. After 2 castles fall, Emperor Arvis conspires against his own son by trying to rescue the captive children, but is put in his place by Julius, who turns out to be the true power behind the throne. Julius is revealed to have killed his own mother Deirdre and tried to kill his sister Julia because their Heim Holy Blood gives him the powers of Naga, which can pose a threat to him as the reincarnation of Loptus. He and Ishtar leave Milito's castle to play a game of Kill the Rebel, becoming 2 very powerful optional bosses. The area is guarded by a huge number of dark mages with even more Helltones and sleep stabs, so I rely on Hawk because he is the only unit in my army who has a high enough resistance to avoid being put to sleep. Despite his high avoid, he is still hit by a Helltone, but I managed to avoid disaster by healing him with a physics staff. After committing the rest of my troops, I managed to clear all of the dark mages and approach the mini-bosses. Julius and Ishtar sit right next to the castle and are extremely powerful, but there are many ways to deal with them. The simplest option is to just let them kill one of their units. If you offer up a human sacrifice, they will consider their hunting game concluded and just leave the map. This will be the ideal solution with my huge roster of useless units, but I would rather have more cannon fodder for the final map. It's also possible to use a berserk staff to make them kill an enemy unit, which also apparently counts, but it's quite difficult and bothersome to set up. As for the other alternatives, you can try defeating either Julius or Ishtar, causing the other one to leave, but they're both extremely lethal. Ishtar has high avoid and can one-round nearly any player unit with an adept trigger, and Julius is nearly invincible, so this method is very risky. The last option is to just seize the castle, which is what I choose to do. I move Seliph to just outside of Julius's movement range, and with a leg ring, he has just enough move to move past Julius and go straight for the castle. I prepare a rescue staff user just in case this doesn't work out, to move Seliph out of danger if he misses, and then target the Dark Mage Zaga. Seliph kills him quite easily with critical hits, and seizes Milito's castle immediately afterwards, causing Julius and Ishtar to leave, triggering the final phase of the map. Now that Julius has left, Arvis decides to rebel one last time by allowing Bishop Paulmark to escape with several captive children, as well as a Holy Sword Tearfing. He also tries to help his daughter Julia escape, but is stopped by Manfroy, who cows him into submission. Paulmark escapes to the right, but finds himself at a cliff's edge with nowhere to run, and several dark mages chase after him to hunt him down. And here lies the challenge. You must save Paulmark from these dark mages and have Seliph talk to him to get the Tearfing, but there are around 24 other enemies in the way. If your army is strong enough, you can simply force your way through, but the presence of a sleep staff user and high amounts of physical and magical damage makes it nearly impossible to simply run by them. In my current circumstance, going by the land route will simply be too slow and too dangerous, and this is why having a strong flyer is absolutely crucial, because they can engage dark mages without drawing the attention of the main formation of units. I choose not to engage the main army, which remains stationary, and fly Femina across the water to save Polmark and secure the Tyrfing. With her current stats, Femina can one-shot dark mages, but can only take 3 hits from them before dying. There's no practical way to heal her, which means that I must use cancel to launch hit-and-run attacks. In order to have enough movement to do this, I have to wait for the dark mages to get close, and once they do, I one-shot the first one with the Brave Sword and then cancel away into the ocean to get to safety. I take out a second dark mage in a similar manner and then move near Polmark. The enemy dark mages have a somewhat random targeting AI where they can choose unpredictably between attacking Polmark, the children, or your units. And unfortunately, I get incredibly unlucky as all 3 of the dark mages pile in on Polmark and wombo combo him into the dirt, killing him and losing me the Tyrfing, putting me into an extremely precarious situation where I have to approach the endgame with 0 holy weapons. With 0 holy weapons remaining in the game, there will be some major problems in completing chapter 10, since defeating Arvis without one is very difficult. Arvis has Nihil, Pavice, 40 defense, and 40 resistance, which makes him extremely hard to damage. Without a holy weapon, even level cap units have a very hard time doing more than 40 damage, and since Arvis has Nihil, you cannot get additional damage from critical hits or skills. All of this combined with his 15 passive healing per turn creates a formidable damage per turn check that is difficult to overcome. Seliph, even when armed with his Brave Sword and Power Ring, is only able to do 2 damage per hit for a maximum of 8 damage per combat, making it practically impossible to overcome his HP regeneration, especially considering that his hit rate is not great. Trying to do chip damage with other units is worth considering, but unfortunately Arvis has way too much damage with Volflame, and most characters cannot survive a single hit. I considered trying to use stronger weapons on Seliph, but soon realized that Leaf is a better candidate because he has higher strength and skill. I find that the optimal build for maximum damage against Arvis is to equip him with a Silver Lance and all the relevant rings, bringing him to a total of 52 in might, allowing him to do 12 damage per hit, with the additional possibility of adept triggers happening. The Brave Axe is also an option, but sadly Brave weapons in FE4 cannot activate adept, which makes it a lot worse. In order to obtain enough funds to transfer all of this equipment, I equipped Leaf with a Thief Sword and have him obtain money by individually robbing all the enemies defending Chalfie. I transfer all the relevant rings to him and then set up all the bonuses I can, including Seliph's leadership and Lady's charm. With all this combined, Leaf is able to do 12 damage per hit with a very impressive 80 hit rate. I repeatedly attack Arvis, using Recover with Hawk to heal Leaf to full HP with every attack, and I manage to slowly deplete Arvis's HP, overcoming his passive healing. But just killing Arvis is not enough. There is a secret objective that you can fulfill if Seliph gets a last blow on Arvis, which is normally very easy if you have the Tyrfing, but very difficult without it. So I have Leaf switch to his Silver Sword to do less damage, and I manage to get Arvis down to exactly 1 HP, making it possible for Seliph to get the final hit. After defeating the Emperor of Granville, I have Seliph go to a specific tile on the beach where he is visited by the ghosts of his father Sigurd and mother Deirdre, who admonish him for kill stealing, and then leave him a Recover Ring, an expensive item hidden in the sand to prevent an accurate assessment of Sigurd's finances. With the recovery of the last of Sigurd's hidden wealth, I have Seliph seize Chalfie, which allows him to destroy all remaining records of his father's tax evasion, so he can inaccurately portray himself as a common man to the masses for political purposes when he in fact descended from one of the wealthiest men in Jugdro. In the final chapter of FE4, Genealogy of the Holy War, we have no inheritances and no holy weapons, nullifying the genealogy and holy aspects of the title. As Seliph marches on the Granville homeland, Silis and Augustia are liberated off-screen, because there's not enough time left in the story to revisit the areas. Julius and Manfroy remark on Arvis's death and then discuss the matter of Julia. Julius wants her dead, but Manfroy somehow convinces him to allow the use of mind control because that's his bet. Meanwhile, Luan gives Seliph some exposition about the backstory of FE4 and how the ancient Lofter Empire began because some dude sucked off a dragon. The map begins with multiple dark mages besieging our castle with Fenrir tomes, but they're easily handled with my range units. The first wave of enemies consists of a large wave of cavalry, which I deal with by placing Leaf on the castle. He kills everyone except for 2 unarmed paladins, which are another prime opportunity for free XP. Around now, the map is relatively quiet, so I consider my options. I want Hawk to use the Berserk and Sleep Stabs, but unfortunately he doesn't have enough money to get everything he needs, so I decided to try for some last minute marriage prayers or transfer money. My first choice is to get Hawk married to Laylee, but unfortunately she has automatically married Johan, almost entirely from the paths of love growth. I would just kill Johan off to break the pairing, but unfortunately in FE4, once units are married, the bond is permanent. So I desperately try to find another pairing that works. Unfortunately, due to Hawk's late join time, he is behind on love growth with nearly every remaining female character. The best option seems to be Linda, but Rotobond is further along the marriage track than Hawk, so he's gotta go. I swiftly take action and get Rotobond killed so Hawk can be the rebound guy and get married to Linda for monetary purposes. I have Hawk and Linda sit next to each other and spam end turn until they are eventually married. I even managed to get a last minute Linda-Hawk marriage conversation, giving Hawk +3 magic, raising him to the Sage magic cap, and with a magic ring, this just barely allows him to reach some very important magic thresholds for using Berserk or Sleep against some very important enemies later in this map. The next challenge is a huge array of defenders in Edda, consisting of a mobile squad of sword fighters and a stationary group of mages. The defense is led by the swordmaster Voice, who is potentially threatening if he gets lucky with critical hits and adept activations, but I figured that if my units died in such a low probability event, I would benefit regardless, because it will be immensely entertaining. I lure his squad away and convince Boyce to attack Leaf, who counterattacks and one-shots Boyce with a Brave Bull critical. The remaining enemies are a huge number of Siege Tome mages and Sleep Stab priests, but it's simple enough for Seliph to handle in his sleep in a more literal sense than you might imagine. Seliph has a ton of avoid because of his high stats and leadership bonus, so I just have him move into a forest. Because of his low resistance, he is immediately put to sleep. However, his high avoid ensures that all of the enemy Siege Tomes have a 0% chance to hit him despite the fact that he is literally not conscious. I'm able to sleep dodge tank for 5 turns in a row with no difficulty, waiting out the entire duration of the sleep status. Once Seliph wakes up, I move into another forest closer to the boss, where he is immediately put to sleep again and bombarded with magical attacks that cannot hit him. After napping for another 5 turns, Seliph wakes up and I have him kill the boss with his brave sword and seize the castle, recapturing Edda, whose former leader Claude died 2 decades ago because I forgot to move him from his starting position. And as such, the entire lineage has died out, meaning that Seliph has to bear the burden of ruling their territory. After hearing of Edda's defeat, Duke Brian of Dozo and his Lieutenant Fisher launch a 2-pronged attack, one at our home castle of Chalfie and one at the newly captured Edda. Brian is quite formidable since his holy weapon Hellswath gives substantial stat bonuses, granting him a total of 47 defense and 27 resistance, which is pretty ridiculous. Fortunately, he does not have Nihil, meaning that he can still take critical hits, which will chew through that defense like butter. However, since he has the Accost skill and a tremendous amount of might and accuracy, he has the possibility of being extremely lethal. I have Leaf handle Brian's soldiers and send Seliph to clean up Fisher's lot, before using the return band to send Seliph back to the home castle. I size up Brian and consider my chances. Brian has a 49% hit rate against Seliph and does enough damage to kill him in 3 hits if Accost activates enough times. But as everyone knows, low probability events don't actually happen, so I just go for it. I attack, and Seliph immediately lands 3 critical hits and kills Brian instantly, putting an end to an entire Crusader lineage in self-defense. After seizing Dozo, Luwin provides an exposition dump on the world's setting, and only now does Seliph find out that Julia, the mysterious girl that he married on his joining chapter, is his half-sister. But Seliph gives no thought to the newfound tangles in his family tree and moves on to the next objective. The next major enemy force is Phrygia's Gelbrider, consisting mainly of barons with Thoron tomes, which is joined by Yavi's Bage Ritter, who are bow knights armed with brave bows. Once you reach a certain point on the map, the Bage Ritters spawn in and will try to catch you in a pincer attack, and so I send Seliph alone to trigger this event, and then immediately have him retreat with his superior movement, so he doesn't get caught in between 2 forces. I'm able to lure out small groups of bow knights to limit the damage I take per turn, allowing Seliph to safely chip at their numbers without putting him to a risky situation. Once their forces have been sufficiently diminished, I go for the commander Scorpius. Scorpius has the potential to do a lot of damage with Pursuit and Accost, but he does not have a one-range weapon and thus is easily lured in and defeated in 1 round with Seliph's brave sword. I clean up the remaining Young Bee forces and then move towards Frege, which is led by Hilda, who has at this point been a boss for multiple chapters, having merely retreated in chapter 10. The Frege barons don't have much movement and thus are also easily lured out into small groups and defeated in a piecemeal fashion. I take out Hilda with Sela, finally putting an end to her, and move on to Sea's Freed Castle. There, we talk to an NPC who tells us that Ishtar is responsible for protecting the children in the city, which is supposed to make her seem more sympathetic, but honestly, the entire situation about what Ishtar's deal is just leaves me extremely confused. Now, the most threatening phase of the map begins with several existential threats showing up from multiple directions. The first being a trio of Pegasus Knights. These enemies are infamous for being difficult to kill due to their sky-high avoid and immunity to critical hits, not to mention their self-healing from their earth swords, and their jump scare level damage from critical hits. The second threat spawns from the right. Arion flies in to try to seize her home castle, as payback for when Seliph seized his without even fighting him in Chapter 9. If Altena was alive, you could trigger a talk conversation between her and Arion to convert him into a green unit, but unfortunately Altena is dead. I fly Femina into the upper left of the map in the hopes that she can distract one of the fire trio into separating to make them easier to deal with, but unfortunately they do not take the bait. And so I deploy all of my units in the hopes that if I cannot secure kills immediately, then my weaker units will take one for the team and die in the place of more useful characters. Arion is a formidable physical threat but has low resistance, so theoretically I could just hit him with a sleep staff, but I need to conserve its use for later threats, so I decided to try to deal with him the normal way. I start by attacking with Thoron on Linda, who I trained up to level 30 by grinding on unarmored paladins earlier in the map, continue with Leaf's Brave Bow and finish him off with Hawk. Now the Pegasus Knights move in, and in order to separate them from their leader, I move Hawk forward and use the sleep staff to put Meng, the commander, to sleep, and then to get Hawk out of the range of the other Pegasi, I use a rescue staff to move him to safety. The other two Pegasus Knights, Bleg and Mabel, move forward, but fortunately only reanimates within striking distance and she dies instantly. This little mishap actually comes with a silver lining because it lured one of the Pegasus Knights even further into my attack range. I move in with Seliph first, so his leadership bonuses will affect future attacks, and then continue with Leaf, but unfortunately Bleg is way too dodgy and keeps avoiding blows. I dance to have Seliph finish off the first Pegasus Knight and then have Leaf attack the second one. As it turns out, because of a weird quirk of programming, the Earth Sword casts an exact replica of Nosferatu to range, which actually adds a significant amount of weight, allowing Leaf to quadruple Mabel from 2 range with a Brave Bow, which is enough for him to defeat her in 1 round. Now that 2 Pegasi are down, I move to hunt down the sleeping Pegasus Knight commander in the mountains, though she has a ton of avoid because of her leadership bonus. To counteract this, I stack Seliph for range to add his leadership bonus and attack with the Brave Bow to do significant amounts of damage, and I follow up on the next turn to finish her off. This handles the first 2 major threats, but unfortunately this still leaves a matter of Ishtar and a mind-controlled Julia. At this point, we have killed Ishtar's entire family in battle, so it stands to reason that she is somewhat upset. Ishtar leaves Valhalla to fight us, and she is a completely dangerous combatant, and there are very few units that can fight her safely, and I currently have none of those units. And this is because her Mjolnir Tome gives her a crazy amount of might, and while she does not have Pursuit, she has a very high chance to activate Adept due to her incredible speed. Some trained units can just barely survive a single hit from her, and pretty much nobody can survive too. Ishtar is not very durable, but she also has a ton of avoid from her leadership bonus and high speed, so trying to kill her before she can attack is not particularly reliable. In a normal playthrough, you could just attack and then reload for a map save if you get a bad outcome, but in an Ironman setting, I can't do that, which forces me to seek out more unconventional and indirect methods. So I decided to try something that I think very few people have ever tried before because it's too stupid and unnecessary. I have Femina, who failed to sacrifice herself for a momentary distraction against the Pegasus Knight trio, fly down to do another distraction attempt. I have Femina fly to a peninsula at the coast north of Valhalla, and simply by placing her there, Ishtar and her forces have been convinced to move upwards. So it seems that Ishtar's movement AI is not targeted towards her home castle or any other particular location, but rather simply towards the nearest target that she can attack. Since all my other forces are at my home castle very far away, Femina is much closer, and Ishtar and her entire squad try to pursue her. But all I have to do is move Femina just 1 tile upwards, where their 2-range weapons cannot reach, and then they just can't do anything to her. And so they decide to turn around and move towards my home castle, where all the remaining targets are. But once they move back down, I just place Femina back on the peninsula, and their AI bloodlust demands that they move back up. In other words, I have discovered a nearly useless tactic that lets me infinitely distract Ishtar's forces so that they would never actually reach my home castle, giving me effectively infinite time to handle any preparations I need to do. Femina is not very strong, but she can get free attacks by diving in and then escaping back into the water with Kanto. By doing the peninsula dance over and over, I can wait until vulnerable enemies shuffle in, I have Femina swoop in to target the healers, but I have to gamble on lucky adept activations to kill them in one round before the other healers can heal them. But fortunately, I have all the time in the world. I keep repeating this process until all of the healers in Ishtar's employ are dead, and this allows me to proceed to the next step of my master plan. Unfortunately, Julia has been mind-controlled by Manfroy and has become evil, which is indicated by her slightly angrier eyes. Normally, most people don't train Julia because she is an enemy on this map that you're not really able to kill without causing huge complications. So unfortunately, my investment into her has now backfired immensely, and I will have to somehow deal with her formidable level 30 stats and her 100 kill crit enhanced Nosferatu tome. Julia spawns in the upper right of the map, which is close by Ishtar, and so she is actually sucked into the Femina vortex up north, which stops her from being an immediate threat. But unfortunately, Julia and Ishtar being bunched up together makes dealing with either one of them particularly difficult. I have Seliph and Femina work together to separate them. I get Ishtar to follow Femina while I bait Julia into chasing after Seliph, who fortunately can easily survive her attacks by dodging them. Seliph's Nihil skill ensures that he won't be instantly killed by a crit, and his leadership bonus and forest terrain give him enough avoid to actually drop Julia's hit rate to 0, and this is mainly due to Nosferatu weighing her down and having lower hit than other tomes. And so I'm able to completely neutralize Julia by having Seliph endlessly dodge tank her in the forest. I kite Julia all the way into the lower left of the map to ensure that no funny accidents occur. Julia is handled, but I still need to deal with Ishtar. Ishtar has 31 resistance, so Hawk's 32 magic is just barely enough to enable the use of status stabs on her. I could just hit her with a sleep or silence stab which shuts off her magic and essentially guarantees a kill, but that's too simple of a solution, so I don't do it. Instead, I use the berserk stab on her so that Prince Julius knows what it's like to have his lover be mind controlled. I'm able to trap Ishtar in the mountains and have her kill all of her own troops by using the berserk stab multiple times, expending a ton of money and repair costs to do so. And after Ishtar's soldiers have all been killed, she actually stops fighting entirely because her AI has switched into retreat mode, where she tries to return to Valhalla to fetch more troops. In this mode, she doesn't attack, so I'm able to surround her and stop her from moving towards Valhalla, trapping her effectively permanently and nullifying her threat for the rest of the map. With Ishtar handled, the penultimate challenge of FE4 is finding a way to free Julia from her mind control, and she can be freed by defeating Archbishop Manfred, who is stationed at Voltomer Castle, though the way there is partially obstructed by Julius and his 12 dead lords. Moving up an entire squad will be bothersome, so I decided to send a Leaf alone. Manfroy is protected by 6 Dark Bishops armed with Hell Tomes and Sleep Stabs, but notably they lack any other equipment. And while the Hell Tome does reduce units to 1 HP, they are incapable of dealing a finishing blow, which is something I aim to exploit. I move Leaf up and around Valhalla to avoid aggroing the dead lords and lure the bishops in while I stay outside of Manfroy's siege tome range. The bishops immediately put Leaf to sleep and close in to use their Hell Tomes on him, and while they can put him to 1 HP, they can't actually kill him, so when Leaf wakes up 5 turns later, he's able to counterattack and kill one of them with his Brave Bow. Leaf is immediately put back to sleep on the next turn, but after 5 more turns of dodging the Hell Tome while asleep, he's able to wake up and kill another Loptier cultist. I keep repeating this process until all the Loptier cultists are dead. Now, Manfroy is unprotected, but he's no slouch. He does a lot of magic damage with the possibility of following up with Adept, which for many characters is potentially lethal. Fortunately, Leaf has enough HP and resistance to just barely survive 2 hits. Leaf's accuracy isn't great, but he has no risk of dying against Manfroy, so all I need to do is keep attacking until I get lucky and score some critical hits. Fortunately, there is a church nearby, allowing Leaf to heal himself repeatedly, but to make the hit and run cycle faster, I set in Hawk to heal Leaf with Recover. I repeatedly roll the dice by attacking Manfroy in enemy phase with a Brave Bow, and after several attempts, Leaf managed to get a crit and kills Manfroy from full HP, causing his control over Julia to dissipate. With this, I'm able to have Seliph talk to his sister wife Julia to shake her out of her mind control state with the power of love, recruiting her into the army and giving us the final tool that we need to defeat Julius and beat the game. The final challenge of Fire Emblem 4 is defeating Prince Julius and his 12 Deadlords, who are a bunch of resurrected undead warriors who are repeatedly referenced in later games despite being kind of lame in their first appearance, being little more than a small squad of goons that you roll over before taking on Julius. Normally, Prince Julius is nearly invulnerable to most attacks because his Loptus Tome halves all incoming damage, which combined with Nihil makes it very difficult to overcome his passive healing even when using legendary weapons, of which I am currently in short supply. Thus, the usual usual method to defeat this final boss is using the Naga Tome, which you can get by bringing Julia over to Voltomer Castle. There she obtains a legendary weapon which nullifies Loptis' damage reduction and gives her plus 20 to a bunch of stats. Here I use Selev's considerable wealth to transfer gold to Julia to get all the best equipment possible for her and then bring her to the final confrontation. I start by having Julia summarily execute a helpless Ishtar in full view of Valhalla to assert dominance and then move to fight the Deadlords. I have Leaf perform hit and run attacks and have Julia sweep away most of them using the Nagatome on enemy things. Soon 11 out of 12 Deadlords lie dead except for Deadlord Gallus, who is armed with a Hell Tome. At this point I could just throw Julia at Julius and win immediately, but that would be too easy, so I don't do it. Instead I decided to do a plan that has low probability of success, which is to cast Berserk on Deadlord Gallus to have him bring Julius' HP down to 1 with a Hell Tome. I move in to prepare for this and accidentally leave a low HP John in Julius' range, which results in her immediately getting nuked from orbit by a meteor, resulting in her immediate death. Now that I'm in range, I have Hawk use the last of his wife's money to repair the Berserk staff and use it to cast Berserk on Deadlord Gallus. Unfortunately, on the first turn that he is Berserk, Gallus doesn't actually attack Julius and just moves around the castle, which at the time was very confusing. But I just wait another turn and Gallus moves around, striking Julius with a 33% Hell Tome hit, dealing 79 damage and bringing him down to only 1 HP. Gallus is killed on the counterattack by a Wrath Loptis crit, but he will be remembered for his service. Julius responds by obliterating Dimna with a meteor, and my player phase begins. Now that Julius is only 1 HP, anyone can get the kill, since all successful hits deal at least 1 damage, so I decide to throw in a bunch of useless scrubs against him first. If they get lucky, they get to be the no-name heroes who save the day, but predictably Tristan doesn't have a very good chance with a 9% hit rate, so he dies. Johan gets to try next with a 1% hit rate, but sadly it doesn't work out either. So I give it one last try with Ahmed, who shows how mid he is by being evaporated by a Wrath Loptis crit. And at this point, I figure that this is enough fucking around, so I just have Leaf attack with the Brave Bow, and the real hero of Jutro lands a finishing blow and kills Julius, causing a giant apparition of a dragon to emerge from Valhalla. Unfortunately, this is just a death animation and not a phase 2 transition, because this map hasn't going on long enough already. Loptis dies screaming in horrific agony, bringing about a new age of peace and prosperity for Jutro for an unspecified number of years to come. With the Dark Lord defeated, Selef moves on Valhalla to seize the castle, completing Fire Emblem 4 Genealogy to Holy War in a way that I would not recommend that anyone try. This concludes my Fire Emblem 4 Genealogy to Holy War Ironman, and as the story wraps up, Selef becomes King of Granville, and the closing conversations are quite brief because most of the story-relevant characters are dead. Leaf goes on to rule New Thracia, and Hawk now leads Silesia, but the nations of Augustra, Izak, and Verdane are left leaderless, so they turn to Selef, causing him to accidentally annex several territories. In true family tradition, I obtain my final rank for the game, which consists of an E in Tactics, E in Survival, D in Experience, and C in Combat for an overall rank of D, which is definitely higher than I thought it'd be. Overall, in my opinion, Fire Emblem 4 has many interesting, fun, and humorous gameplay interactions, and it gives you a lot to think about in designing character builds and allocating resources. But at the same time, it is a pretty antiquated game at this point, and it breaks apart if you try to push it to its limits. The large maps are a feature unique to this game, and they create many cinematic moments that uses the game's engine as a substitute for cutscenes, but at the same time, it makes the gameplay quite tedious without using a fast-forward feature. A lot of the combat ultimately does boil down to having one really strong character, solo 2 dozen identical enemies on enemy phase. FE4 has something that I like to refer to as jump scare difficulty, where the vast majority of the game is relatively simple, with the exception of a handful of surprisingly difficult individual enemies. Though even then, they're only a real risk if you've lost all of your units and have squandered all of your important resources. Fortunately, in my playthrough, both of those things happened, which made the endgame really interesting. Playing with the substitute units, sadly, was surprisingly not that interesting, just because most of them are really bad, and since I wasn't playing to get a higher rank, it's easier just to rely on guaranteed units like Selef, Ares, and Leaf. And as such, I don't really think there's so much value in ranking characters or making a tier list for this playthrough, so I'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe or consider donating to my Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. See you on the next one.